Hi book friends, I'm Erin, and this is Erin Go Read. It is May 16th, and we're coming to the end of the second round of the Booktube Prize, so the quarterfinals, and I'm a judge for nonfiction this round. And let's see, I have read 3, and I'm in the middle of 2, and then I have one more left to start, and I think it's actually the shortest book that I have that I saved for last. So I'm going to kind of do a bit of a vloggy style wrap up of that while you'll see me reading the books that I'm reading right now, and then at some point I will pop in and talk about the books that I have already read. I don't have the beautiful cover on it, but I'm reading Underland right now, and who's the author? Underland by Robert MacFarlane. It's a series of informative and immersive journeys into various parts of the Underland, and Underland just meaning under the ground. It has me really interested in all sorts of different topics now. They're like, ooh, it'd be cool to learn more about that. And I am about a third, I think, of the way through right now. It took me a little bit to get into this. I actually started this on audiobook, and I felt like I was listening to a National Geographic show, just the narrator, and not without actually seeing it, and it was really easy to kind of tune out of it. So I switched it. So it's maybe the first 80 or so pages that I listened on audiobook, and then I switched to the physical book, and I'm enjoying it much more as a physical book. Some of the writing is really beautiful, and I feel like I'm really experiencing, he's into these caves, and he's with this other guy, and they're exploring these caves, and I feel like I'm down there in there with them. So I'm quite enjoying this, and I find that I enjoy it. I find that I really enjoy it when I'm able to devote a half hour, an hour to it at a time, a little bit in larger chunks than I started off reading it just kind of a little bit more distracted and in smaller little pieces, just based on what's going on in my life. And I think you really need time to settle into it and really follow his narrative. The other book I'm listening to on audiobook is Charged by, I think it's Emily Bazelon. And it's kind of an expose and an indictment on not just the criminal justice system, but specifically the criminal justice system regarding prosecutors and the amount of power that prosecutors have within the criminal justice system, which is something that I was not aware of. There are parts of it that have seemed, I'm just kind of trudging my way through. There are other parts of it that I'm really interested in. There's all this background information that she gives regarding past cases or the way that the law works, and in terms of the police and the prosecutors and the judges. And then there are 2 cases in particular that we're following that are kind of following different trajectories. One is a young woman who is charged with the murder of her mother. It's a white girl I can't remember, somewhere in the South, I think in Tennessee. And then the other is a Black young man who's charged with a gun crime in New York. And we're just seeing how, based on the different styles and methodologies of prosecution, their lives are differently affected. And then the last book is How to Be an Antiracist by, is it Ibram, I think? I'll correct myself if I'm wrong. I haven't picked that one up yet, and I'm gonna need to finish Underland before I pick that one up. But I have 2 weeks to finish the 2 books that I'm in the middle of, and the one that I haven't started yet. So that shouldn't be a problem. So I'll check in with you guys later. All right. Well, I just finished Underland, and my nieces and nephew will be here any minute. So I just wanted to give you my quick thoughts at the moment. It's so good. First of all, I hadn't shown you the cover before, and the cover is just stunning. The nature writing part of it is just beautiful. So you have the beautiful language that he uses, and then the structure that he writes the book in is that in each section, which each section represents one of the places that he goes to, you'll have chapter breaks. So in each chapter section will alternate between his narration of what he's experiencing at that site, So it's a little bit of like adventure nature writing kind of stuff. And then he'll go into sections of that's more informative about that place, other places like it. He even brings in things like folklore, like toward the end in particular, he brings in this really interesting Finnish folklore related to the Underland of the underworld. And he ends up tying it up, all these like completely disparate places. He ends up tying it up really, really well, and the whole time using really beautiful writing. So I am really into Underland. I think especially if you like nature writing, there's a lot of just like straight up nerding out stuff. So particularly the parts of those chapters where he's not talking about himself, he's more in like explanatory mode, can be quite nerdy. And there are certainly points that I was like a little bit less interested than others. And I really loved his first person narration of it. What I noticed was interesting about it as opposed, because he's writing about the Underland, and he's not, this isn't like an adventure writing book, although that's certainly a part of it, is I think he did a really good job of not making it about himself and his own like perils and adventure that he was having. He explains things and you feel the discomfort and the claustrophobia and maybe the fear that he would have been experiencing, but he's very much reflecting it out as to the environment and what he's seeing, and it's less about his own heroics or anything like that I think he could have gone into that. So I think he does walks kind of a fine line of where you still experience some of the discomfort and fear that he might have been experiencing, while at the same time not making it about him and really keeping the focus on the environment itself. So highly recommend. This is going to be, I'm not sure about my rankings yet, but this is definitely going to be high up there. Okay, the kids aren't here yet, so I'm going to talk about Charged by Emily Bazelon. What's the subtitle? The New Movement to Transform American Prosecution and End Mass Incarceration. So this was, I'd never thought of or heard of looking at the criminal justice system kind of from the eyes or looking specifically at prosecutors, and had no idea like the amount of power that prosecutors have. Sometimes a lot of times actually even what should be the call of a judge is basically ends up being the call of the prosecutors, or where the judge just goes along with whatever the prosecutor's recommendation is for like sentencing and stuff like that. You know, I listened to this on audiobook, and I think if I was reading the physical copy of this, it would have been really hard to keep going. There were points of it that I just was not all that interested in. She uses two kind of case studies of a young man in, I think it's Brooklyn, a young black man in Brooklyn who gets charged with a gun crime, and then a young woman, Nora, in, I think it's Tennessee, somewhere in the South, and she is accused of murdering her mother. And it puts the two prosecutorial systems against each other and show how they're different, and then how it affects the lives of each of those young people. And then it brings in all sorts of other, my hair is just not fabulous this morning. I don't know. Is that better? Ugh. Shake it. Ugh, I feel like a dork. All right, maybe that's a little bit better. So she goes into looking at prosecutorial misconduct and the kind of the flawed system and how prosecutors police themselves, and how like judges and prosecutors are kind of policing themselves and each other, and it's not a very effective system. She kind of compares and contrasts different methodologies in the way that prosecutors will treat cases on a case-by-case basis, or as a general whole for certain types of crimes. It was certainly enlightening, and I could definitely see that if you are someone who is interested in criminal justice, you're interested in the law, I think this would be an excellent kind of like research source. Just as a regular reader reading it, although there were parts of it that were very interesting, and I think that she did a good job from my like limited knowledge. She did a good job of explaining the things. It just wasn't my cup of tea, I guess. I think she did a good job. I think a lot of people will be really into this, just especially when I compare it to the other books that I'm reading. It's by no means my favorite. They're still not here, which makes me think that my brother-in-law probably stopped to get us coffee, so I'm not complaining. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and start How to Be an Anti-Racist. I have a hard time with that title. How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. And he is a National Book Award winning author for Stamped from the Beginning. So I'm gonna get started with this now. It starts with my racist introduction. Nice. There they are. The big kids are into watching The Office now, which is super exciting. But this is the Scott's Tots episode, and it's so bad. It's a couple days later now, and I want to talk about the first 2 books that I read for the quarterfinals of the Booktube Prize. And I think I have to keep in mind, too, that these were books that I read just after my husband died. And, you know, I had 6 books to choose from, and these were the first 2 that I kind of gravitated toward just because I guess that's where my mental space was. Like, that's what I felt like I could focus on and handle at that time. So the first one, seems odd that the first one of those was Parkland by Dave Cullen. I listened to this on audiobook, and I think that was probably a good choice for this, as I was having a really hard time focusing on anything. And the weather was really, really nice in April, and I was able to just go on lots of walks, go out into the backyard, and just listen, rather than sitting down to read on a difficult subject. So if you don't remember, you're not aware, Parkland refers to a shooting in Florida. I had a lot of trepidation going into this book. I had heard other people talk about it. I didn't really remember anything that they had said about it, actually, just that it was a book about a mass shooting. This author also wrote a book about the Columbine shooting, which happened when I was, I think I was in high school when that happened, and it was kind of like the first big mass shooting, school shooting like that we had experienced. Parkland as well was a school shooting. And so I was quite worried that this was going to be, it's really hard in terms of, I didn't want to know about the shooter, what led him to it. But what I think is really great about this book is that although the events stemmed from this murderous act of terrorism, that's not what the book is about. The book is about the response and the resiliency and the organizing and grit of these young people. So what was unique about the kids in Parkland is that their activism, their response started during the actual act of shooting. And so there were, tweets and videos or whatever happening in real time. And then these kids, their movement gathered steam. And so Dave Cullen spends a lot of time with many of these kids, young adults now, basically the trajectory and the path of their activism. It's the story of the kids' response to this act. It made me feel, as someone like twice the age of the kids in the book, it made me feel just really proud of these kids, and I guess gave me kind of some hope too for the next generation coming up, that if this is examples of leadership coming out of generation, what are they? I guess these are Gen Z. If this is an example of the leadership and the heart and the minds that are coming out of Gen Z, then I think we're in really good hands. So I don't believe the shooter's name is ever mentioned. There is little to no information about him or his life or anything like that. It is all about the kids, and then in their activism and going out, like, for example, they end up meeting with, because these are like white suburban kids. And so as part of their movement, they coordinate and collaborate with like an inner city group of Black kids from Chicago, and they learn a lot from them and the different things kind of that they have to be afraid of, and the different issues that are in their community compared to what the Parkland kids have experienced. If you have been worried that this book is about the shooter or about the terrible tragedy, it really isn't. It's about what comes afterwards, the resilience and the fight. And really, I mean, it really makes me proud of the kids that are coming up. And it was kind of a weird thing to experience. I don't know these kids, but through reading it, you come to know these kids and just how much work, time and energy they devoted, traveling all across the country, still, finishing up high school, starting college, and really fighting for a cause far beyond themselves. And I think we're probably going to see some of these kids go on to do really great things in their adulthoods. Nonfiction is so hard to rate and rank, because I guess unless you just really didn't like it, it's really hard to compare because the subject matters are so vast. Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Laurie Gottlieb. I read the physical copy of this, and this is probably the only book of the 6 in these quarterfinals that I would have been able to read so soon to Sam's passing because of the style of the book and the subject matter. So Laurie Gottlieb is a therapist, and she comes to being a therapist through quite a circuitous and interesting route, including working in Hollywood. And essentially, she comes to find out that she really loves people and she really loves storytelling. And so being a therapist is kind of a really nice amalgamation of those things. And she experiences something that requires her to go to therapy for herself. And so we get kind of these parallel views of her experiencing therapy and the revelations about herself and other people and the world, revelations about being a therapist as she experiences through her own therapy, and then the perspective of her as a therapist with a couple clients in particular, and the growth that they experience, the growth that she experiences as their therapist, and just how she's affected by her clients and their growth and all that. It was really, really readable. It was really interesting. As someone, I had just recently started therapy myself, so there were lots of things that I was recognizing in myself or just in the process. She would bring up actual psychological terms, but explain them in a way that was very accessible, and she was using them in context. And so it wasn't just the definition of something, but you're actually seeing it play out. Like, what does that actually mean? So, I don't think as far as subject matter and the importance of the book, that this is going to end up ranking up there very high, just due to the heavy subject matter of the other books. But it was really enjoyable. I would definitely recommend it, and I read it at the right time. When I was having a really hard time focusing on anything else, I was drawn into this and was looking forward to reading this book. One, because it was really readable, so it was easy for me to just get absorbed into it. And 2, because it was interesting. It was just really interesting, and I wanted to be, I wanted to hear her stories. So these two, interesting that these two are both blue, and these are the ones that I chose to read in April when I was going through a really difficult time. The other books are pretty much all in like a black, red, and white kind of color scheme. I wonder if that had anything to do with me choosing to read them when I was quite down. I don't know. But anyway, I highly recommend both of these books if those sound interesting to you. 9 o'clock. I just finished How to Be an Antiracist, and wow. Also notable that, I was reading this book, right after the murder of George Floyd. And so that was certainly on my mind, and the murder of Trayvon Martin was brought up in the last chapter or second to last chapter as well. So certainly, putting an exclamation point on the importance. Looks, this is right over my head. Putting an exclamation point on the importance of this book, and why I'm glad that many books like it are coming out. And I've been seeing actually on Instagram from my cousin a book. What is it called? It's something about white supremacy. But so yeah, so I've been seeing that, and then there's the why I'm not talking about what is it called? Why I'm done talking about race with white people, white fragility. Is that right? Yeah. So yeah, a lot of these books are out, and I had been reticent to read them because it's stressful, and it's heartbreaking and frustrating, and that's but that is the essence of white privilege, is that because I'm not Black, because I pass as white, I can bury my head in the sand and choose to ignore it, choose to not, to just not read about it, not watch the news, and avoid the stress and the heartbreak of it. And if you are Black, if you have Black people in your family, which I do, you can't avoid it. You don't have the privilege of avoiding it. And so it was a really good reminder that I need to be involved and aware. Now, May 30th, the last day of the quarterfinals, and I did submit my ballot last night with my rankings, and so I'm going to tell you about the last two books. So I finished How to Be an Antiracist last night, and I believe I did talk to you about that. One thing for me, which first of all, I think it's absolutely amazing, and it's something that I think I will continue to think about, and I will probably revisit this book at some point too. What was really neat about it is that Ibram Kendi, the author, is really honest about his own kind of evolution and his own thinking, and his own, actually, he recognizes and explores his own racist thoughts. He looks at things like lighter-skinned Black people being racist against black-skinned Black people, or financially stable Black people looking down at people who they see as beneath them. He looks at so many different angles. I'm going to continue thinking about this book. The one thing for me is just as far as readability and enjoyment, I guess, of it. Parts of it where he's talking about, it's a bit more narrative when he's talking about his own experiences, and particularly the last, I think, 2 chapters. I was much more into the flow of his writing. When he gets a bit soapboxy, I guess, and very, I don't want to say pedantic. Am I being pedantic if I use the word pedantic? I think maybe I am. He's very logic driven. So it's like, so if this is this and this and this and this and this, and so therefore this. And so he brings up some really, really great points, but I think sometimes it's just like hitting you over the head with something, and I would have to read it like multiple times to really capture what he was saying, as opposed to when he's speaking in a bit more of a narrative casual style, I am picking up what he's putting down a lot better. So fantastic book, highly recommend it. And this would be a really great resource. Like if you have high school, college kids, or you are in high school or college and you are writing on a particular subject, I think this would be an amazing source for that. And then the last book, which I don't think I've wrapped this one up yet, is Solitary by Albert Wood Fox. And the subtitle is Unbroken by 4 Decades in Solitary Confinement, My Story of Transformation and Hope. And so this is about this man, Albert Wood Fox, he was in jail. I can't remember if it was jail or prison for something that he did actually commit. But then he ends up being convicted of something that he did not do while he's in prison, and ends up with a life sentence. and he spends 40 years, I think, 30, 40 years, four decades, 40 years in solitary confinement. And so he shows amazing resilience and grit and personal growth. Just my personal preference as far as nonfiction goes, I really like a memoir. I like learning about, in the case of How Not to Be Racist, Solitary, and Charged, all three of these books are dealing with racism, and they're dealing with the criminal justice system, and then the collision and the effects of that intersection. And those two books are looking out. They're looking at the concept, they're looking at the overall history. There are some case studies, particularly in Charged, but the same concepts are addressed, but through one person's perspective. So he does talk about other people who he encounters, but it's memoir. And so I personally just get a lot more out of that. Even when I was talking about How Not to Be Anti-Racist, the parts that really spoke to me were the parts that were a bit more memoir-like, where he's speaking of his own experiences and his own growth. And so this one touched me so much more. We still see the systemic racism and the terrible policies and treatment of particularly Black men, but we're seeing it through the eyes of one individual and his experience. So this one spoke to me so much more than the other two. So now, if we look at all 6 books, how do I rank them? Okay, I've worked it out now, and so I will share with you my ranking, starting with number 6. I have not given star ratings to any of these books because for the prize, we don't do star ratings, you just rank them. So they could all be 5 stars, but you still have to put one at number 1 and one at number 6. So number 6, book I very much enjoyed, is Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. And at the time I read this, it was absolutely the book that I needed. It was lighthearted enough, and just really compelling that it's what I wanted to be reading. In the class of books that we're looking at, I just don't think this is it's certainly not the most important book. It is definitely the most readable book. So if you're looking for something that's nonfiction, that's a bit more readable, that's interesting, there still is like factual information, factual as far as learning about psychology. A really good read. I just don't think it stands up as far as like importance of the actual subject matter. Number 5 is Charged by Emily Bazelon. It was a lot of information, and although there was a lot of just really enlightening, shocking information about the criminal justice system, and particularly about the power of prosecutors and the power of prosecutors and how much of an impact an individual prosecutor's philosophy and methodology can make a really big difference in the scope of an individual's life and all of the people that come through their court system. Book number 4 is Parkland by Dave Cullen. This book, it just makes me think, like, I just feel so proud of the young people that this book is about, because this is about the survivors turned activists of the Parkland shooting. And as I was reading that, I listened to this one on audiobook, and I just remember feeling just so proud of these kids, and it really gives me hope for the future of this country and the future of the world, that there are individuals like these kids in this book that are going to be the leaders of the future. Then we have How to Be an Anti-Racist. Absolutely amazing. Just not one of my very favorites, but I definitely think I will be revisiting this book at some time. Then we have Solitary, number 2 by Albert Woodfox. Fantastic. My number 1 book is Underland. Just the writing is gorgeous in it. It was super interesting. I like the way that he broke up his chapters between his individual experience as he's kind of on the adventure of exploring the Underland and the places, and then the other parts of the chapter, which are a bit more information heavy, talking about the history of things, the science of things, other things related within the world, throughout the world about whatever it is that he's exploring. And I particularly liked that even when we are in those kind of adventure pieces where we're in his first person narrative experience of it, it's not about him, the adventurer. It's still about the space and the wonder of what it is that he's exploring. So I just really loved that. And look at that cover. This definitely wins for best cover, but for me, this also was my favorite read of these 6. For the next round, I will be judging fiction, and I'm super excited to find that list out tomorrow. I'm hoping that I own all or most of the books. There's some definitely that I've been saving and really looking forward to reading. So for now, thank you for watching. I'd love to know if you've read any of these books or if you're interested in reading any of them now. Thank you for watching. See you around the tubes.